Hi everyone, I'm Adrian Alexander, Caribbean Regional Coordinator for Free the Slaves, Secretariat to the Caribbean Coalition Against Trafficking in Persons. I have the pleasure of joining you today with Dr. Cherisse Francis, our very valued and precious Cherisse, who fills so many roles here at the coalition, including co-host of Caribbean Connections. And this is one of those very special episodes. Joining us today will be Dr. Warren Thompson and Mr. Kwasi Cudjoe. Kwasi is a member, or at least his organization, MenCan, is a member of the coalition, so it's good to have him on screen. And I'll tell you a little bit about Cherisse, who pursued her PhD studies in examining anti-trafficking in the Anglophone Caribbean at the University of Warwick in the UK. She completed those studies in 2024 and is a member of the Human Trafficking Research Network and facilitates workshops for judges, judicial officers, and other stakeholders of the justice system. Warren is a social worker at heart with a passion for improving the well-being and quality of life of others. He's the Director, Intake Investigation, Adoptions and Court Services at the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, or CPFSA, in Jamaica. He holds a PhD in Gender and Development Studies and has researched and published in the fields of gender studies, social work, and community development. He's a proud father of twin boys. Kwasi is a Trinidad and Tobago-based development specialist with over 14 years of experience advancing social transformation, citizen security, and community resilience across the Caribbean. He's the founder of MenCan, a locally rooted support group where men can engage in personal development and self-reflection. Kwasi designed and led the Inside Out Dad program for incarcerated fathers and a barbershop initiative, which reached over 1,500 men and boys across Trinidad and Tobago. He also co-developed Project Sarah, an anti-trafficking intervention that addresses male demand and its links to human trafficking. So at this point, I will hand over to Cherisse. And before I do it, I want to make this comment because during the webinar series that we had last month to observe World Day Against Trafficking in Persons, perhaps the most popular webinar for that week was the first one, and that focused on cyber scamming and sport trafficking. 2 weeks later, we used our social media to throw the information out again and really see how people were engaging with it for each of the days. And I would say this webinar emerged as the one getting the most reactions on our social media 2 weeks later. So after the World Day Against Trafficking in Person itself, after the focus on cyber scamming had died down, people wanted to know more about addressing demand. So I'm really happy to be having this conversation again, and I hand over to Cherisse.
Thank you so much, Adrian, as always, for doing all the formalities and really making us sound very special. I do agree that today is going to be a wonderful conversation. When we did the webinar, there was so much energy in the space, and to hear Warren and Kwasi and our other guests who we had at the time, Neil, give their presentations and to speak to this idea of the demand side of commercial sex, the demand side of exploitation, the demand side of trafficking in the Caribbean, and the gendered lenses to that, but also the different approaches, the different levels to combating these instances within our communities. I think that from the questions that we got at that webinar, but from the audience, but also from the thoughts of the steering committees and the members of the team, this conversation is definitely one that is needed and one that we are so excited to continue. So with that, I'm just going to jump right in. If you want to, both Kwasi and Warren, kind of give us an overview context of a little bit about what you would have talked about at the webinar for those persons who weren't able to join us, but who are now listening to this podcast episode. What you talked about at the webinar, but also an overview of what male demand in commercial sexual exploitation, how that factors into this idea. Either of you can start first.
Hello, Kwasi to go first.
Yes, okay, Warren. So my presentation and discussion. So again, thank you for being here. Thanks for the viewers for joining in. And just to give a quick overview of what I spoke about, I spoke from the perspective of male demand being socially linked and went a bit deeper into helping persons to understand that, harmful masculinities is one of the driving factors for demand, and also advocating or making a call to action to really be intentional in including men and boys in your programming or your prevention initiatives as allies. Because, sometimes we think that an initiative has to be very complex, but, just a start could mean if you're rolling out at a community level, having that discussion with, and I would use the term gatekeepers loosely, those influential persons within the community. So it could be faith-based leaders, community organization leaders, sport leaders, to sensitize them and make them aware of the dangers of human trafficking. Because in making men and boys allies, we first have to educate them, what to look for. And then, enable and empower them on how to act. Yes, we understand that men send powerful messages to boys directly or indirectly. However, when you look at, and I want to talk from the men can perspective, which is our men's group and the support spaces that we create, men enter these spaces really looking for the knowledge and the support to make a difference through a myriad of issues in their lives. So that was what we spoke about, understanding that, from a citizen security perspective, that crime is prevented long before authorities and legislation become involved.
All right. May I go ahead? Right. Okay, right. In my presentation, I looked at the, let's say, the social context that drives demand, looking at cultural factors, and of course, some gender-related factors, looking at how the ways in which we construct masculinity in the region lends itself to a kind of cultural environment where it is okay for men to demand the exploitation of another body, particularly the female body, and the way in which the gender system allows that to happen. Right. So, in a nutshell, that's what I looked at in my presentation. But if you allow me to continue, I've been thinking about it, the fact that demand for sex trafficking, we talk about the way in which masculinity is constructed. And in my mind, we can't put demand down to the individual or the individual's choice. But the truth is, it does come down to the individual's choice. It comes down to an individual making a decision that although the culture allows for these kinds of configurations to occur, there's a way in which there is a lack of justice in these ways of being and operating. So we really have to look at the issue from two perspectives, both addressing the cultural factors, the way in which we construct masculinity in ways that are harmful, and Kwasi talked about toxic masculinity, I believe. And we also have to address it from at the individual level. What are the things that we need to do, certainly whether as a state response or even from civil society, to help individuals to make better choices. So I think it's attacking from both areas.
Thank you so much, Warren. And I would agree with you. And I think during the webinar, that's the thing I really enjoyed about the way that both your presentations kind of played together. Because, Warren, you spoke to us a lot about the state response to the legislation. You gave us some context what's happening in Jamaica. Then you brought it into the popular culture realm, talking to us about some of the lyrics and what the lyrics that we have in our music and the things that we engage in, how that creates certain expectations and perceptions. But so then we saw that the community, the culture, is a part of the problem. And then Kwasi gave us this understanding that given this cultural context, understanding that our communities are a part of the challenge, we also have to go back to the communities to strengthen them to be a part of the solution, to educate men and boys, to bring them into conversations with each other, and to be a part of building out the changes that we want to see. And because of that, I kind of want to drill down with both of you a bit more on this cultural bit, this cultural context of the Caribbean. In your professional works, in Warren, for you, in your academic studies, as a scholar, when we're thinking about the cultural context in the Caribbean, do you see, or how do you see that context creating a distinction between how the root causes and the factors around this commercial sexual exploitation reinforce the challenges in the Caribbean? So how is Caribbean culture making the problem worse or creating vulnerabilities to these root causes? And because Kwasi went first last time, Warren, I'm going to put you in the hot seat first.
I'm trying to break the question apart a little bit more. Sorry. So come again, help me. So we're looking, so we're looking at how the.
So I want you to talk to me about Caribbean culture. Trafficking, commercial sexual exploitation is a global problem. We know this. But how is it that the Caribbean identity, Caribbean culture, Caribbean structures, how do those things make the problem worse? Or how do they feed into the root causes?
All right, so a number of things. I think our culture, and I mean, it's not unlike other cultures too, but there are aspects of culture that I'm trying to find a better way to say it, but it's really, it lends itself to normalizing exploitation. So, we historically, we have a practice in the region of like even something like child shifting, where it is okay. And I was reading something recently that for child shifting, it really, and I hope you understand what I mean by child shifting. It's sending a child somewhere else to live while you either pursue opportunities, either you migrate or whatever the reason is. So child shifting is a practice in the region. And the argument has been, I was reading this recently, something that was done, I think, in the 1970s, that it's because of how we see family and see children in particular, that children belong to the community and not just to the individual family. But those kinds of cultural practices without safeguards in place there's a way in which it allows for those same children to be exploited by who those children are placed with. So I'm just using this as an example. So the culture, and yes, it might be a good practice, but without safeguards, it is easy for those children to be exploited. In fact, the thing that I was reading said that, there was no consideration about the impact of the shifting on the children, right? So when you look at other aspects of our culture, there's a way in which we think if you can benefit from the exploitation of another person in whatever way, then that's okay. And I don't know if I said this in the webinar, but there's a way in which in the region, well, I see it here in Jamaica, there's always an expectation that somebody's going to scam you, right? If you go to the market and you're trying to buy something, there's an expectation that they're going to give you an inflated price. It's like, it's cultural. So there's a way in which that kind of scamming and that kind of exploitation, as it were, has been normalized. So if somebody is able to take advantage of another person, then it just is what it is. That's how we see culture and life in the Caribbean. Now, when it comes to sex trafficking in particular, let me just say sexual exploitation in particular. This is so interesting. I was recently reading some work by Shani Roper, and she was looking at how childhood was conceptualized in Jamaica in the early 20th century, late 19th to early 20th century, and she was talking about sexual abuse. And she cited a number of court cases where a child would have been a victim of carnal abuse. the matter goes to court, but the men, in a sense, got off because the argument was that let me give you one particular case. So the girl apparently climbed up into a tree on the man's property, and she apparently fell out of the tree. And because she fell out of the tree and she was, splayed, he took the opportunity to sexually abuse her. And the argument from the court, that's the argument that he made. She fell out of the tree and he didn't abuse her. But it was found that he did abuse her. But the argument from the court, the judge, when the judge gave the sentence, I think he was sentenced to something like 12 months at hard labor. And he only got off because he had no previous offenses. And they were of the belief that the girl should not have been on his property, and the fact that she was on his property and was exposed, it created an opportunity for him to do what he did. But the argument was not that you're an adult and this is a child, and you had no reason at all to abuse her in the way you did. So there's a way in which even the legal system excused the man's behavior. Yes, he was found guilty and given a very light sentence, but his behavior was almost justified because the girl presented herself in a way that tempted him. And I think very often when we think about even things like sexual exploitation and sex trafficking, we always look at what did the victim do to I guess tempt the man, and there's no responsibility of the man in making a good decision. It's the same thing when we look at missing children cases in Jamaica, especially when girls go missing. There's an automatic assumption it's a bad girl, and she went out there looking for something. So if she found what she was looking for, then you can't blame the man. You have to blame her because the man is being a man. So there's a way in which in culture, in our culture, we excuse certain kinds of behaviors from men. We accept certain kinds of behaviors as normal. Men want sex. Men will take it anywhere that they get to get it from. And if they get it from a young girl, it's a young girl's fault. If they get it from an older lady, it's an older lady's fault. So the culture has, and it's very, very much tied to the gender system. So it is a way in which men's behaviors are excused, men are privileged, and there are some things that we believe that men can get away from. And I'm talking about it not because I'm men blaming, but the fact of the matter is, and I think I said this in the webinar, majority of the victims are females and the majority of the offenders are males, right? I was thinking also about the fact that we do have some females who are complicit in sex trafficking and sexual exploitation of other females. But then if you look at the heart of it, it goes back to the same thing. There's a privileging of the male's behavior. The male can do some things and get away with some things, and the female body is almost like it is expendable. But anyway, I don't know if I've answered the question, Cherisse, but I'm just thinking about how all of these things play together to really not so much drive demand, but allow for it to occur.
Yes, you've definitely answered the question, and we'll circle back in a minute to talk about how this intersects with violence against women, which I think you set the scene for really well. But I want to go to Kwasi now and hear what Kwasi has to tell us or thinks about this idea of culture and how culture, Caribbean culture, plays together to impact the root causes or the manifestation of commercial sexual exploitation in the region.
Warren really unpacked that nicely. And I want to say that as much as there are nuances throughout the Caribbean region, a lot of the territories have similarities. And I want to go back to the whole idea of community and social cohesion. As much as the small island developing state has the strength of rapid norm diffusion because we're still somewhat community oriented, the same diffusion system that allows for positive norms to be disseminated quickly allows for negative norms as well. But what I want to kind of lean or throw as an idea is the concept of, again, that lost village. the concept of the ideology among a lot of the territories of, everyone is, because, Warren spoke about, child shifting. And that is something from my recollection that, started, well, from as far as I could recall, the 80s, when you had what we call the barrel child syndrome, where parents in an attempt to provide, would migrate from a territory, go to probably North America, and leave the child within the, the guardianship of a relative. But is that want, need, or that desire to provide? And because of the challenges faced by SIDS, many times we have different type of family structures now. And because of the changing family structure, what we once considered as a village, which would have reinforced and enabled positive characteristics or behaviors, it's no longer there to safeguard. Because, in citizen security, we call that community guardianship, where community players and actors act as that first or early warning system, because the dynamic has shifted now, and it's something common throughout the territories, where it's common to find parentification, a 9-year-old looking over his or her 8 and 6-year-old siblings, because mom or dad, if it's a dual parent or whoever, is out to work. What that does is, one, that system that acted as a first line of defense or alert in sharing information in things that may be illegal, unhealthy, is no longer there. Because again, and then we have common sayings like, I'm just minding my business. So I think because of the challenges faced by communities now, at the community level, there's no longer a strong social cohesion unless you live in a community, let's say, with relatives. And even that dynamic is changing because of migratory patterns. So whereas people may have stayed in rural areas, throughout their entire lives, it's again a different dynamic. People are shifting out, families are, I would say, splintering, not in a negative way, but, whereas a young son may have remained or gone to the town and back to the village, he's going out, he's renting. So now you have families and persons attempting to address or counter some of those same negative norms that have been perpetuated for ages. And the support that came through an aunt in the community or shopkeeper who would then look after, let's say, or look out, I should say, for a young man or young lady, it's no longer there. Because one of the things, and Warren spoke about, he raised some really good points. And I know we could really hammer home, gender norms and stereotypes, but what we need to address this also at the adolescent and youth level, like really address it, where organizations could tailor messages that are suitable for youth. Because when you look at media, when you look at and I long time used to say the indirect or messages. No, it's quite direct. It's quite blatant what is being said in songs where, women are being, objectification of women, sorry. It seems like the easier thing to do because what we are dealing with as a coalition is not something that happened overnight. It's culturally embedded. It's, and culture through, to some extent, I would even say personal religious beliefs or ideologies that reinforce certain things. And, from a commercial aspect as well. Because yes, we're talking about sexual solicitation, but what about forced labor? And I think I raised that example in the webinar where, persons would hire, like in the Trinidad context, male Venezuelan migrants and underpay them because, they are considered illegal. And it's almost like I'm helping you out, not recognizing that is a human being who's entitled to an honest day's wage. So I would say that as much as there are nuances, again, the fragmentation to an extent of the concept of community amongst the Caribbean territories has, to a degree, helped in perpetuating or enabling the spread of negative behaviors and messaging. And I know some persons might beat me on my cast for saying that because, again, that stems from the idea of I need to mind my business. That's your child, or that's your son, or that's your daughter. But that social cohesion and community that once acted as a buffer is slowly being dismantled, if not dismantled completely.
Thank you
Can
so
I make
much,
another
Kwasi.
comment?
Of course you can.
Yeah, I just want to, Kwasi did make some very good points, and I want to follow up on one. Just about the community. The fact of the matter is that the socioeconomic conditions in our communities also plays a role. And I'm thinking about situations, for example, where even sexual grooming is normalized. So there are communities where, because I know one particular case. So this is a young girl in high school, and then there's an older man, more than twice her age, who started to, I guess, give her gifts and start to talk to her with the intention of having a sexual relationship with her. And of course, she's not interested. But then you have her parents who are telling her, like, listen, you're not going to get a better man. You have to just, this is a real case I'm telling you about, right? And these things happen more than we know. So those things also create those situations where we're saying, listen, if this man can pay you, this man can give you gifts, then yeah, if it's access to your body that he needs, then might as well give that to him. So we have those factors as well to consider as a part of the things that drive demand.
Thank you for that. And it's so interesting that you both mentioned the socioeconomic factors, but also the ideas of migration, because I have also often wondered about our Caribbean men as lost boys almost, or a very vulnerable population. Because if you think about what would have happened in the 70s, where lots of our men, especially from the Eastern Caribbean, would have migrated to go build the Panama Canal or to do work elsewhere because they couldn't get work at home, or the conditions weren't allowing for the work at home. And then many of those men either didn't come back to the region or came back, but not to the families that they had left. And I often wonder about circumstances like that and whether there's any connection between then this demand for commercial sex or sexual engagement, or this need to show sexual prowess in whatever way, because then our men are looking for a place to belong or a space to call their own again. But that's just my segue. But thinking through this, I want to talk a little bit about how this problem of commercial sexual exploitation, demand for commercial sex, how this interacts with violence against women in our region. What are your thoughts on that?
It's interesting that's where you went, Cherisse, because I think I said it in the webinar that there's a way in which, I don't remember if I said it, but as boys, we hear it in the music, and even among our peers, there's a way in which you learn violence, and that violence should exist in sexual relationships. Did I say something like that? No, I did. Okay.
You did, yes. You even gave us some lyrics to that effect.
Okay,
so
right.
Everyone should go watch the webinar.
I need to look back at the webinar. No, I'm thinking when I was growing up, and maybe I was naive, but when I was in high school, and I don't know if this was ever your experience, Kwasi or Adrian, but I my ideas about sex. So of course, young boys do have a desire for sex. Not all of us are able to get it, but in my mind, if I were able to have sex with a girl, how I would know that I'm doing it well is if I made her cry. I don't know if you ever heard anything like that, Kwasi, but that's something that of course, I thank God that I grew up and I learned otherwise. But that was a belief that I legitimately had, that, boys, men, that you're doing it well if you inflict pain on the female partner. And there's a way in which you hear it coming out in songs too. So we use very, very violent, I can't remember the word, but imagery, put it that way. We talk about sex and even sexual organs. So you'll hear Vybz Kartel talking about his gun or nine or knife or whatever want to call it. So because the male sexual organ is to inflict pain on the female partner. So that's one side of it. But then the other side is there's a way in which violence, we expect men to be violent. There's an expectation that men are going to be violent. And it just so happens that women are the recipients of that violence sometimes. I think culturally, I'm hearing more and more, it seems to me, I'm not sure what the data is showing right now, but it seems to me that a lot of persons are becoming more sensitive to issues around violence against women and girls, particularly intimate partner violence. But what I find is that although people are getting more sensitive, there's a way in which people take a position where if it's a private matter, then let it be dealt with as a private matter, right? But I think I said this in the webinar too. You know, there's a if you talk to the commercial sex workers, they will tell you that they get clients, customers, because the customers are able to rough them up in a way that they can't rough up their spouses, right? And that is a real issue or concern, because it seems to me that a lot of men fetishize, is that the word, violence, right? So that is, yeah, that's what I have to say right now.
Thank you so much. Kwasi, what about you?
So Warren really laid the ground. One of the things I was thinking about is, you know, why are some of the reasons given by men for purchasing sex? And once we understand that once a human being is dehumanized, it's easy to disconnect, because some men, and Warren said it, some men want to engage in specific acts that otherwise they can't engage in. So be it some men want to engage in acts that are otherwise, I want to say, illegal fantasies, be it rape or whatever. And because this woman is now an object and it's just a service you're accessing, now you don't understand that this person is not involved in this of their own free will. But because you normalize the thought and you justify the behavior, you know, I'm paying for this. This is what I'm paying for. And therefore you're required to do X, Y, Z. Another reason is, and again, looking at violence against women and girls, is because men have said that, you know, purchasing sex allows them to have that physical connection, with little or no emotional involvement. Now, there are some commonalities. When we work with men, there are some things we keep hearing and seeing popping up. And again, it's similar to the whole concept that, you know, when I become angry, there's an immediate link to me behaving violent, not recognizing it's two different concepts. And it's similar to me not caring for you means I could treat you anyway. That comes up a lot with men. So men who say, like, if you ask them, be it in a, let's say a normal relationship, why it is you spoke to her like that? I don't care. I don't care about her. There's no understanding that not because I may not have any emotional investment in this relationship or individual anymore, that they still deserve respect. Now, let's take this into the context of the human trafficking sphere, where now you have an individual who you have no sort of knowledge, relationship, or connection to. It's easy to objectify and even treat worse. So when we talk about violence against women and girls, there's a clear connect with one, perceived value. Two, again, we will always find those underlying gender norms, you know, the power and control dynamics. Because, you know, one thing Warren spoke about earlier on, that some women are complicit in the whole, you know, trafficking agenda. But some, you know, interviews, research has shown that some of these women, again, they do not wield the power. As much as they are complicit, it's not necessarily complicit by choice.
Right.
We really have to look at that. So it's easy for a man to, again, he pays for sex. And again, in Trinidad, and as in some of the other territories, there are particular parts of islands that the industries that exist there heavily engage in, you know, a commercial sex. But again, when you, and Adrian, you recall when we did Project Sarah, we targeted persons from a particular field. And it was a norm in terms of their behavior. It was, these men were considered senior professionals. In this particular field, they're considered the money makers. In every island has that kind of concept. If he's a doctor, lawyer, engineer, that kind of thing. So again, the sense of power and entitlement that I spend my money. That's what they will say. I spend my money. When you tell them about the same way they would walk into a store and probably see a t-shirt and say, I want that. I'm going to buy it. That is mine. It's the same way they walk into a brothel, see a young lady, and here you have it. Again, not understanding or not wanting to understand that this is an individual. I am perpetuating violence against women among other things, but it's intentional again to disconnect from that sense of responsibility.
Well, can I say something else, Cherisse?
Of course.
Because I'm concerned. I'm getting concerned about the younger generations and what they're learning about like intimate partner violence. Not just violence, but just how you see males and females when it comes to sexual relationships. Because I'm going to give the lyrics. I didn't give this one in the webinar. So this is a young artist, and there's a line in one of his songs where he says, "Oh, the bleep, you fit talk with my testicles in her mouth." And it's a female that he is, referring to or talking to. And then there's another line where he refers to her as dog poo, let me put it that way, but in a much more thing. And when I think about it, I'm like, so what is he saying about the woman? What is he saying about women, and what is he teaching younger boys about how they see women? And then you can imagine that if you see women that way, where you're referring to women as dog filth, and then you think that through the sexual act, that's also a way of silencing women, because she's really just there for your pleasure. Then it means then you're not just objectifying women, but then women become an object that can be commodified, right? So I think those things, it's distressing, but it's certainly connected to this whole issue of demand.
I agree, and I think you've both made some really excellent points, and I really appreciate that you're bringing us the context both from your personal experience, your professional experience, your academic works, but also just really giving us that practical understanding. We've been talking a lot about the issues, and at Caribbean Coalition, we like to give a little bit of hope. So I want to flip the script a little bit and let us talk about strategies to bring about solutions. What do you see as some strategies that could help to curb this problem to make a difference? I consider you, all three of you actually, as boots on the ground, as experts in this, people really doing the work and not just talking the talk. So I want to hear from you, Kwasi and Warren. What do you see as some strategies for solutions?
I don't see Kwasi unmuting, so let me.
I can jump in first if you wish. It's not a problem.
I was going to say something, but I think, and I think I said this in the webinar too, when we talk about addressing sex trafficking or the commercial sexual exploitation in general, we target let us refer to them now as the victims. We think you have to address the supply side, but you don't address the demand side. I think that's an area of public policy where we've been going wrong. And I think, the research is there showing that some of the things that do work is, of course, targeting and disrupting, if we want to call them hotspots, but those areas where, men would go to buy these services, disrupting those areas. And then, of course, putting in penalties for buyers. There is no, well, I can't speak for the entire region, but I think there's enough commonalities among us for me to say. I don't think we target buyers enough. I think very often the operations are aimed at scooping up. If you want to say they're doing an operation, scoop up the sex workers, but not enough is done to scoop up the clients. So those are two things that I think can work.
Thank you so much, Kwasi. What's your perspective?
So what I think doesn't work, and I'd like to probably hear Warren's point on this. I don't think shaming works. I remember at one point in Trinidad, we had the name and shame campaign where persons, the protective services would probably raid a particular establishment and then parade the guys. I think that may work based on your level of liability. So according to where you're employed, if it has any adverse effects on it, i.e. I would lose my job. However, if it's like, if where you work, it's a joke the next morning, boy, I saw you. And then it becomes even a unhealthy competition to start in one of those name and shames. And it might sound funny, but within subcultures, people are able to normalize even negative consequences in such a way to make it acceptable. So what I would say definitely is, let's say, treatment programs or rehabilitative programs. If you are fined for soliciting or even, I want to say, suspected, similar to community service, have some sort of rehabilitative programming to at least, because what that does is a number of things. One, it helps to me, the state really decide or be able to identify if there's some sort of psychological issue going on, and it can be based on certain psychosexual challenges or tendencies, and you require support there. Also, it sort of veers away from the immediate punitive response, which is quite common with a number of issues. Now, I know based on the severity of the issue, you may be at risk of society, so you need to be detained or whatever for an extensive period or whatever. But rehabilitative or treatment programming, public education programs, which we are, most territories, they are doing that. But I want to say, going back to what Warren spoke about youth, again, crafting the message and using the correct medium to engage with youth. I've seen in country here, sometimes we have radio type messaging, but the station is run on, people 45 and over listen to it. Nobody wants to listen to Bill Withers. No young person is listening to that song. They'll be listening to probably a Cartel or whoever's a new hip person. But really, and this goes back to, again, something Warren said, what I was saying, it's using evidence-based, data-driven approaches. So even if you're doing intervention in certain spaces, it's because the data shows there has been an increase in solicitation or whatever, XYZ. And we're not just, because we have limited resources as SIDS. I would also say working with companies. Again, I know I've always said communities, and communities not necessarily within a specific geographic location, but there's a community within company X, company Y, company Z. And it could be simply having a HR personnel, when delivering whatever they're delivering on sexual harassment, have a separate section just to talk about that, a lunch and learn. But really educating persons and helping them to understand, well, this goes counter to our policies, XYZ. But again, creating a wider awareness. Law enforcement is always necessary, and that's something. But I would say marrying law enforcement with that sort of community social response as well.
Warren, did you want to hop in?
Yeah, I think, no, I agree with everything that Kwasi has said. And I'm just thinking about a couple of things. One, let me start with the sexual harassment training, for example. Very often when in companies you do sexual harassment training, there's a way in which many men come away thinking that, boy, we can't just be ourselves, right? And almost as if there's an attack on them as men. I think maybe what we need to do is, when we have those sexual harassment training, you have a pull-out specifically for men, looking at what are the ideas that we have, or what are the things that we learned that we really need to kind of unlearn now and unpack and go through that. So I think that might be necessary. I think The truth is, because I never really thought about the naming and shaming strategy. I think if we look at all the literature, we might see some suggestions that it does work. But I'm really not sure if it would work so much in our context, as you said, unless it's some very high profile clients who may use offenders who may lose their livelihood or lose their status or so on in the community. But I think I agree with you that if we have to start from legislation, if we have legal provisions for charging and prosecuting those demanding services, then one of the ways to treat with that is not just to charge or fine, but to ensure that those men participate in some kind of rehabilitative program to get them to start to think differently. Because if it's charge and fine alone, that's not going to work, because across the region, I'm sure we generally have high rates of recidivism. So I think we have to look at how do we change the mindset and the culture. Now, one of the things that I'm not sure about is in terms of the public messaging, and you're right, we need to get these messages on TikTok, Kwasi, and where the young people are going. But then how do we get our popular artists to come on board, especially when they maybe have the view that certain kinds of things sell? That's the part I'm not sure. How do we get them to shift from messaging that says, hey, women should be recipients of violence, or hey, women's bodies are to be commodified. How do we get them to shift from that? I don't know.
So I need to jump in here. Again, like when I design programs, sometimes with stakeholders, I say outright, we need to be realistic about what we can achieve. As much as you want to write it up fancy for a donor, be realistic about where resources could reach. And to that question, Warren, I would say the reality is some stakeholders will not be interested because it will cut into their dollars and cents. And to me, I've seen a trend across the region where when you're close to retirement, that is when you beg for forgiveness and you start to sing a different song. But that's a different conversation by itself, because you would have already made your money, sending out certain types of messages. But again, within every context, there are persons who have that social capital amongst the youth or the elderly. And I think it's important to recognize them as allies and stakeholders and work with who's willing and who's ready. Yes, it can be simply having side conversations or meetings, sensitizing these other individuals about what you're doing. And this even cuts across to, the media and how they report, because something you spoke about early on is how are these things reported? When a young lady is missing, she go on by she man. Or when the gentleman is charged for certain things, you hear people still in 2026 saying, she looked fit. So again, victim blaming is, I think, something that is common within our culture. And one last point, I agree that sometimes we need to, I want to say isolate, for want of a better word, our target audience, if it's men, and have that discussion, because we are pushing back against generations of ideologies. Up to a few years ago, people across the Caribbean were still saying things like, my mother used to beat me like that and nothing wrong with it, like how I turn out. That's child abuse, pal. Because things have been normalized to respond a certain way to a child. And similarly, we have men responding a certain way to issues around trafficking because it has been normalized. So it will take time, targeted intervention, especially considering that there are a lot of limited resources.
I'm glad they were there, Kwasi, about the way in which these things are coming down through generations, because the case I was mentioning earlier, I don't remember the full details, but the one about the young lady who went in the man's yard and fell out of the tree, that case. I mean, that was something like from the 1920s. So it's a long time ago. And you find that the way in which so there was the victim blaming there, and it's still happening today, right? But what I'm getting to is that, as I said, we have to target stakeholders. We have to look at not just changing laws, but we have to look at getting members of the judiciary on board, getting, the law enforcement on board, because this is normalized behavior, right? And if they're used to a situation where victims are blamed and victims are penalized, but not those who are soliciting services, then there may be an enforcement gap or deficit when we get there. So I think we have to look at it from multiple angles.
Thank you so much. And this conversation is so fascinating. I think we could go all day on this, but I want us to wrap up with a little bit of dreaming and a little bit of hoping. As two men who are on the ground doing the work, what is the kind of world that you would like to see left for daughters or the young women you care about? Or what behaviors would you like your sons to, or young men that you mentor, to emulate or to have as it relates to all the issues that we've been talking about today? What does a better world look like?
So, Warren, take it away.
This is clearly the hardest question that we've asked today. Wow.
I don't know. So as you heard, I have two boys. I have twin boys, and I'm happy. I can share it here in public that I'm also expecting another. So in fact, we were hoping for a girl, but it turns out we're having another boy. But when we were hoping for a girl, I'll be honest with you, I had a lot of fear because not just because of the gender inequality issues, I can put it that way, but I had questions in my mind like, okay, all right, what kind of pressure, undue pressure, would she feel growing up? Will she find someone eventually who will treat her right? Because the truth is, there's a lot of disadvantage that women experience in the world. And the other day, my boys and I were having a conversation. We were talking about how do you treat women, and I was saying to them, first of all, and I don't know if this is for both boys and girls, but certainly for boys, I had to be intentional about teaching them that if you hear no or if you hear stop, it really means no, and it really means stop. Because I realized, it didn't just come naturally, right? I want a world where if I were to have a daughter, she wouldn't have to fear that people will take advantage of her because of her body, or for any reason at all, actually. She'll be respected for the value that she brings as a person, not just because of how she looks or what she's able to give. I'm hoping that she would grow up in a world where there is no exclusion. So, for example, anything at all that she wants to do or wants to be, she'll be able to do that because either the systems are in place or the freedom is there for her to do and be what she wants to do and be. And I'm hoping for a world where she can have a healthy relationship, because it takes, given the world that we're in now, it takes intentionality to have a good and healthy relationship. So I'm hoping that she would grow up in a world where good and healthy relationships are the norm, and I can be confident that she'll find a young man who will care for her and who won't treat her badly and all those kinds of things. Yeah, I don't know if maybe it's too personal. I don't know if I'm answering, the best way, but yeah.
Personal is best. That's how we make the changes. Kwasi, what about you? What does
everything Warren said, with the exception, we are not expecting another, right? Everything Warren said. As a father, I always make that call to parents. We that first encounter. And as much as sometimes we may feel overwhelmed and that we lack the influence within our children's lives, we are able to really craft, to design, to help mold the next generation. I'm saying that to say one of the things I would like to see is a deeper understanding that there are not real men. The reason why I push back against the real man terminology, because I always say there's a young man right now preparing to probably break into somebody's house later, and he's a real man. Real man is subjective. So I encourage parents to use words that attribute positive characteristics. So speak to your sons about being responsible men and being accountable, respectful, things that we could really break down as opposed to just the real. How I behave real here as compared to with my peers, to how a man behaves real in the workplace or on a Friday when he's in that brothel, as opposed to when he's in front of his family. So let's start to use words that empower, strength-based affirmations. And, my dream is to have a world, somebody spoke about, the pathway we move from dependence as children to independence. But even whilst independent, that we recognize that independence is not a free pass to mete out injustice to someone. And even when we, transcend to interdependence in our relationships, that we recognize that individuality also means respect. And not just respect for the person you're close or you care for, but other persons as well. Because we are constantly pushing against messaging, be it from other persons, the media, it's always around. But I really make a call to parents to spend that time to have those conversations, those one-on-ones. And when you could talk to your son or your daughter to really mirror the behaviors that you want them not only to mirror, but understand that you are creating a template for what's acceptable in their lives. So for that man who's probably behaving a particular way and you think your daughter isn't watching, you're sending a silent message that this is the type of male that's okay in your life. That man who's behaving a particular way and you think your son, nah, he's bright, he's going to a prestige school, but you're sending strong messages of it's okay to behave like that. Men who may be looking at this, I always ask this question for you to answer. If you have a daughter, even if you have a niece or a little cousin or female, ask yourself how you would feel if you are in front of their gate asking to take them out. You know yourself, you know what you're capable of or what you're doing or not doing. And if you feel a little tremble in your body, then there's some things you probably need to have a discussion about. If you're in Trinidad, you could give us a call at MENCAN. If you're in the other territories, I'm sure there are other organizations and groups that you could reach out. So that's what I would say.
Thank you so much for that. This conversation has been riveting. I want to live in the world that you have just envisioned. Warren, congratulations to you. You and your family are a part of the CCATIP team, so we congratulate you. That is good news, good blessings, good joys. I'm now going to hand back over to Adrian. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for these conversations. Adrian, over to you.
Thank you so much, Cherisse, and congrats, Warren.
Thank you.
3 times. Hey, go for it. And, really, this has been a phenomenal discussion. So thank you so much, Kwasi, Warren, for sharing your respective, I wouldn't just say perspectives, but sharing truth, because we were able to dissect even more than the time allowed during the webinar a few weeks ago. Well, it's a month ago, right? We were able to dissect more and get deeper into this. And this is not the end, right? Because honestly, in my heart, I see the establishment of a framework that the court can recognize and refer people to. And as you mentioned, therapeutic type interventions. I know each of you would have mentioned, I think Kwasi in particular mentioned the things that men who buy sex say, right? So there's research on that, what they say about the people they buy and rent, what they say about a system or world that criminalizes the thing that they want to do. There's research that recently identified that the conduct of men who buy sex fits the definition of a transnational organized crime network. Right? So we really need to go even deeper and analyze some of the behaviors, but also some of the root causes behind some of those behaviors, because they may be linked to intimate partner violence. And some of the solutions addressing intimate partner violence even look at how to treat with trauma that the male perpetrators may have experienced, even as you said, witnessing certain things taking place, right? And how do we treat with that, shift their behaviors, model behaviors, appropriate, healthy relationship behaviors to them so that they know what they can do better. All right. We can talk about what the research shows in terms of recidivism when those different models are used. So I said this was a great conversation, and I look forward to having some future conversations. For you who are watching this podcast episode, this has been Caribbean Connections. And as the webinar had been mentioned time and again, this was a webinar that took place on 22nd of July, addressing demand. We will post a link to that video just before the end of this particular recording.